We're back now with Republican Congressman Jim Jordan. Good morning to you. It's
Morning.
good to have you here in person. And before we get going, the cut above your eye, you didn't get into a fist fight.
No,
this was just a run-in.
I got between Adam Schiff and a camera. How about that? No, actually, it's somewhat embarrassing. But the door to the Intelligence Committee hearing room in the bunker in the basement where we've been doing these depositions, it opens and it stays open all the time, and then it closes on its own. I stepped out to say something to my colleague, Mr. Meadows. It started to close, and I didn't realize I turned and bumped into the door. So
just so we clear that up right out of the gate.
That's real important. Right?
As you heard from the speaker in that interview, she argues that the aid to Ukraine was only released because of the whistleblower. What reason were you given that the aid to Ukraine was eventually released?
Because President Zelensky met 5 times with senior U.S. officials. One, of course, was the phone call with President Trump, and then 4 meetings, actually face-to-face meetings, with U.S. senators, ambassadors, with Vice President Pence. And in each of those meetings, never was it talked about linking the security assistance dollars to any type of investigations. But what did happen in those meetings is they all became convinced Zelensky's the real deal. Remember, we're talking about Ukraine, one of the 3 most corrupt countries on the planet, and we're talking about the hard-earned tax dollars of the American people. So they became convinced that this media star, this new guy to politics, whose party just won an overwhelming majority in their parliament, was the real deal, and he was legit, and he was worth the risk.
So that
and they
September
said, we'll
9th complaint, and then the September 11th release of the aid, you're saying that's just the calendar just happened to happen
well,
that way.
it did, and plus, remember, the aid didn't have to be released till September 30th.
Right.
So it gets released on the 11th, and most importantly, the Ukrainians did nothing to, as far as investigations goes, to get the aid released. So there was never this quid pro quo that the Democrats all promised existed before President Trump released the phone call.
Well, I want to get to some new testimony. An American diplomat named David Holmes testified behind closed doors on Friday. And I want to know, do you think, because he now has firsthand knowledge in which he explains he overheard a conversation between the President of the United States and Gordon Sondland, isn't he credible? This was firsthand.
Well, I mean, look, he overheard a conversation.
Specifically mentioned of the Bidens.
We don't know if the other 2 people at the table are going to vouch for his story. We'll see, because there was 4 people at the table.
Are they coming to testify, those other 2?
That's Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff controls the witness list. We gave our list. He doesn't give us the witnesses we want, and he can call witnesses anytime he wants. We had to give our list last Saturday. Just one of the many problems and unfairness of this process. So I'm sure Mr. Holmes will get called by the Democrats. He'll come in, and we'll have him under oath in front of the committee, in front of the cameras, and we'll ask him questions, and we'll see how his story holds up.
Gordon Sondland, the ambassador to the EU, is an ally of the president. He was a financial donor to the president's campaign. But he's changed his testimony already. Do you think he's credible?
His addendum to his testimony, never forget, he said, I presume this happened. So again, he'll be in front of us this week as well, as will Mr. Morrison, as will Mr. Vindman, as will Ms. Williams. And we're going to have a host of witnesses. So again, we'll see how his testimony plays out. What I also know is he said there was never any quid pro quo in the text message responding to others on that text chain. So we'll have him in front of us and we'll find out.
That text chain, you're right, but then in this conversation that David Holmes has testified about, he says he heard the president ask, so he's going to do the investigation, and Sondland replied, he's going to do it. Holmes then said he spoke to Sondland, who told him Trump was interested in the Biden investigation that Mr. Giuliani was
It's interesting you're talking about all these details from a deposition that hasn't been released, that just happened Friday night, that we're not supposed to even talk about. This is, again, an example of the unfair process. He'll be under oath.
You want him to testify under oath in the public eye.
I assume Adam Schiff's going to call him. And remember, this, based on what Mr. Taylor told us in the open hearing earlier this week as their first witness, he said that this happened with a conversation that he wasn't a part of, Mr. Holmes, and he's listening in on a conversation between Ambassador Sondland and the President of the United States. So we'll have questions for him, and we'll see how it stands up.
Do you think Gordon Sondland was acting on his own? He says he talks to the President all the time.
He's a Senate-confirmed ambassador to the European Union. Mr. Volker is the special envoy, a distinguished career serving our country in the diplomatic corps.
Right, but Sondland
we have Rick Perry. We have Secretary Perry, Senate-confirmed, working. This whole irregular channel I find interesting because they're all Senate-confirmed individuals, respected individuals, accomplished individuals working on the diplomatic mission, and somehow that's crazy. I just don't follow. Here's the bottom line.
But do you think that the project that Gordon Sondland was working on here, when he said the Biden investigation that Mr. Giuliani was pushing, was that with the president's
Here's what I understand. We haven't heard from Kurt Volker yet. the first witness the Democrats called, the special envoy, Ambassador Volker, he said everything that was done here, there was no quid pro quo of any kind, and it was all done in a way that was consistent with the mission of making sure the aid ultimately gets to Ukraine, and that things are done in the best interest of the United States, done in the best interest of Ukraine. And that all happened. And Ambassador Volker's testimony, I think, will be particularly good and particularly powerful when we get to hear from him later this week.
Specifically, Volker said he didn't know there was a quid pro quo, that none was ever communicated to him. Not that there was definitively no quid pro quo, just that he was not aware of it.
No one's testified that there's been a quid pro quo. Everyone's got second, third-hand, fourth-hand information. Mr. Morrison, who was on the call, said he didn't think anything was improper or illegal on the call. Ms. Williams didn't think anything improper or illegal on the call.
She said inappropriate.
But those are the facts. 4 facts will never change. That's the funny thing about facts. They don't change. The fact that we have the transcript and there was no linkage of any type of security assistance dollars for an investigation on the call. We have the 2 guys on the call. President Trump and President Zelensky said no pressure, no linkage.
So just to be clear, though,
the Ukrainians didn't know that their aid was held at the time of the call, and most importantly, they didn't do anything.
Any specific actions on investigation
to get the aid released.
I understand you're saying the aid was released, but to put a fine point on it, are you comfortable with the investigation that was requested?
The investigation that was requested. Well, look,
that the president spoke to Gordon Sondland about this request to have the Bidens investigated.
I thought we were supposed to be looking into potential impact on the 2016 election and foreign countries' involvement in 2016 election. So I'm comfortable with that.
Well, this is a 2020 election. Does that make you comfortable?
Well, I don't think that's what took place here because there was never an investigation undertaken. There was never an announcement from President Zelensky.
But the request for one that was overheard and testified to.
But it didn't happen. Like, there's all kinds of talk about things, but it didn't happen. And remember, when this all broke,
and the attempt itself doesn't bother you.
What did the Democrats tell us? There was a quid pro quo. The scary thing is the Democrats have been out to get this president. I was struck by listening to Speaker Pelosi's comments. Her answer to your second question, she used the word imposter. Talking about the President of the United States, who 63 million people voted for, who won an electoral college landslide, and yet these Democrats have been trying to get him. The start of this Congress, Congresswoman Tlaib said she wants to impeach him before any evidence. 5 members, think about this.
I understand.
5 members of the Democrat members on the Intelligence Committee have voted to move forward with impeachment even before the whistleblower complaint was filed.
I've got to go to a commercial break. Thank you very much, Congressman.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment.